Hello, so I'm just going to be rushing through these reveals real quick. I just noticed that there was a stream going on and there was basically Messiah reveals going on, but then they decided to kind of just do the Genesis reveals. Turns out the set is actually out in a few days, so I wasn't really paying attention to it, obviously. So it was a bit of a surprise to find out that there's this close of a gap between the reveals and the boost release for the main color set. So anyway, the starting Vanguard Vivid Rabbits. So this is not actually the iconic starter in terms of what they put in the anime and things, because it was meant to be Amon Hawakri. Vivid Rabbit was more like the better competitive choice if you're going into a tournament, because you go into those cutthroat best of ones where there was no such thing as GSs at the time. It's pretty brutal when you don't see. Well, you sort of want to ride your break ride, but then you need to ride Minerva, otherwise you lose the game because the deck does nothing without Minerva. So the good Regalia decks would play Vivid Rabbit back in those days, and I remember how much I relied on this when I went to my first ever nationals. I remember basically being grade stuck on grade 0 in just sitting on this card. This is literally the very first Vanguard I ever had on the field in my first ever nationals, so it is a bit of a throwback. I went against Silverthorns, which is also in the same set, by the way, and I lost because I took ages to ride grade 2. And then after that, I won a whole load of games, but then suddenly my second loss, it was double elimination, so quite late in. I lost to Liberators. Basically, I had my early game hand, which was good, but the problem is I never rode Minerva, so I just sat on Angelica, swing Soul Charger 1, swing Soul Charger 1, and then eventually just get outgrinded by Gunsort Zenith plus Monarch Sanctuary Alfred as the finisher. So that's kind of an interesting choice for a starter, because they went for I guess the more popular one in tournament play rather than what they were trying to push in the anime or in the same set that Minerva came out in, which is Brilliant Strike. I'm not sure which set she was in, actually. I kind of forgot now. She might have been the same set, but I know for sure Amon Hawakri was the main starter they were trying to push. Next, we have Witch of Frogs Melissa. So there's actually Kamal as well, I've heard. So yeah, Kamal, Melissa. So the thing is these two witches came from set 11 in the original game. So that's the Fortuna set, Sealed Dragon Awakening. And in V-Series, Kamal came out with Fortuna. And that's in the V-Clan Collection set. They also had Orange Witch Valencia, which was supposed to really pair up with Great Witch Grappa. That was in Brilliant Strike, but for some reason they didn't do that. They didn't bring out Grape Witch in V-Series with oranges, but they also didn't put grapes and oranges in this by looks of it. They put Frog Witch and Camo instead. So it's kind of an interesting change, and I'm going to guess same reasons Vivid Rabbit, which is they just went for the more competitively played cards rather than the anime theme, what they brought out in set 14. So, I mean, if they really cared about anime theme, I guess they would have not banned the Revelation trigger, so we can still play Amaruda. But next, let's go through the card abilities. So this here says if you ride a Genesis over it, so you can pretty much just play any Genesis cards as your ride line. So if they ever release more cards, it doesn't really matter what you play. You look at top 5, you put 2 from among them into your soul. So that's really handy, because you could put even... One thing I remember is that in the Limbrick era, one thing that made Regalia quite different to other break ride decks, or cross ride decks actually, is that you could put the grade 3 for the cross ride into your soul more easily, because you're soul charging, whereas not that many decks could really soul charge at the time. So if you rode Minerva on turn 3 rather than turn 4, you could basically soul charge Angelica somehow, and then actually one of the cards, the big cards for that was Angelica being used with Appwitch Cider, because Appwitch Cider had an ability where if you had a Regalia Vanguard, you could basically soul charge the Guardian into the soul, and they basically changed the rulings where apparently, like at the time, before you couldn't actually use grade 3s to guard, but then they made it so you could actually guard with grade 3s that had 0 shield, so they became 0 shield grade 3s, and that was used to try and put Angelica into the soul without having to ride Angelica. So here we've just got much better ways of soul charge now, because you're checking top 5. Now the other skill, it's when this card spins, you drop from your soul. So that's really interesting, because it reminds me of Taro a bit. Also reminds me of the old school witches, but obviously they're not played as much, because CB management in Genesis has just become quite atrocious right now. So a lot of support cards do use CB1, and there's not really that many countercharge cards especially in V format, but in Premium, it's kind of made it so that if you're basically playing something that's not Regalia, you're more inclined to use Claimer Harry for this reason, because Claimer Harry is probably the only like good countercharger, I'd say, but it's a GB1, so you have to use it on like after your opponent's reading grade 3 basically. Or if you play something like Gleipnir and you go into Marduk, you could technically use Claimer Harry because you just go Marduk and then Gleipnir to Soul Blast. But obviously you can't use Claimer Harry with Marduk, because Marduk, when you pay the cost, you're not actually on GB1 yet, so you can't use the Claimer Harry during your Strider cost payment if you don't have your unit already face up. So just be aware of that. And then the other thing is that she hasn't got a Counterblast cost here, so... And she also only goes to back row. So basically, if you have a Vanguard Minerva in its name, you call this card to back row Rearguard Circle, and if you called it, you can soul charge 1. So that's really handy, because it means you can maintain your soul at net 0. So it's a bit like Witch of Orange's Valencia V-Series, where you're soul charging 1 just for soul blasting her. And the only difference is that in this case, obviously Orange Witch is selected from drop zone, but in this case, this card works in any phase of the turn, not just the main phase. So it's more like the original Orange Witch Valencia, which is when Soul Blast Soul Charge 2. Here, you're Soul Charging 1, and then you're basically calling her for free in the back row, so you can use her as a booster again. You could use this with Minerva actually to swing for a bigger number, because I'm sure Minerva's a restander. Doesn't make sense if Minerva's not a restander, but that's quite interesting. They've also made this card require Minerva's the Vanguard, so not even Regalia, but Minerva. I think maybe it might just be some weird policy where if you make a stronger version, or if you try to sort of replace a card, let's say the original Witch of Orange Valencia, then you've got to put some sort of restriction so that it doesn't become an outright creep. I'm going to guess maybe that could have been a reason. I don't really know. But they made Melissa into Minerva support, which is very unusual. Not something you kind of expected in the brand of things with this card, because Melissa has never ever been a Minerva card. It's just a generic card, and it just during the break right era happened to be, well, it was just such a strong staple at the time that you would want to play it in Minerva anyway, but you would play Melissa in like any Genesis deck. So this does feel like they're just pushing sort of the more popular competitive card choices into a deck, into its own sort of archetype, rather than I guess reimagining an archetype that they made back then. So next we have Kamal. So her first skill is basically the exact same thing. So you're basically taking 2 from the top 5 and putting them into your soul. And then this looks very different, by the way, because the original has like a very red background. But nowadays they just seem to be making Kamal look a bit more detailed. So now here is the second skill, which is so when you Soul Blast it. So that's kind of interesting again, because honestly I think skills that activate when Soul Blasted are very interesting and more fun. If you have a Vanguard Minerva in its name, so unfortunately you can't use this in any deck besides a Minerva deck. So it's a bit of a win for Regalia in their already abundant choice of cards, but not so much for non-Regalia decks. Then you can Counterblast 1 and call this to rear. So you can call it to any rear guard, so it's not just limited to back row, which means this is your attack extender. And it's a CB1, unfortunately, so you do still have to manage your resources as well, but if you're playing this in premium format, you've got Ablation Regalia VAR, so it's not the worst thing in the world. To be fair, Regalia is not as bad with counterblasting as something like some of the other decks, really, usually. So that's Kalmar, basically, more or less. The other thing is as well is that if you use the Exorcism Regalia Thread, you could move her into Soul and then just free up a space to call this out if you want to play like that. You could do that as well, but you could also do something like Astraea 4 Heavens or Gleipnir to Soul Blast this card and then just call her mid-battle, because the Minerva Stride only Soul Blast Regalia units anyway, and she's not Regalia, so I'm not sure these will actually get played in Premium though, to be honest, because there's just so many good cards in Premium right now. But it's possible. And the thing that's interesting is that you don't even have to ride a specific card, you can ride any Genesis, so I think this could make them more playable in the in the premium format compared to other ride lines. Next we have the grade 3 Minerva, so we just haven't gone to Angelica yet. During your turn, if your soul has a grade 3 Regalia, so this is clearly indicating that we will see some other grade 3 Regalias, your entire front row gains 5k, so it's during your turn, which means it's continuous. So even your superior called cards will have the 5k, and also the other skill, so it mentions here that she can restand. At the end of this unit attacked, if your opponent's vanguard is grade 3 or greater, cost Cam +1, Soul +3, discard a card with only Genesis in its card name from your hand, stands unit, and it gets drive -1. So this is actually a net 0 because you discard 1 and then you restand with 1 drive check. So you're not plussing, but you're not negging like the old one as well. So it's a bit different to the Stride, which is more for plus, and the original, which is more for neg. So it's more cost efficient, and obviously they only made it 1 discard Genesis because they haven't really made that many Genesis cards, and I think they want you to mix some Keta cards for now. So it's definitely a handy ability to have, for sure. It does look like there's another skill though in between. So Soul +1, look at the top card of your deck and put it on the top of your deck or into your soul. So that's basically a revelation, but main phase. So Soul +1, you could call out Melissa, for example, if you just feel like you're lacking a field, and even put Melissa to front row after that if you want to do it that way, and you're still maintaining your soul balance. But obviously you can soul charge 1 if you use Soul +1, which is thankfully it's not mandatory. So if you see a trigger, you don't have to forcefully soul charge 1 and disrupt your stack, which is good. So this is actually pretty good grade 3, but the only issue is obviously your opponent has to be grade 3 or greater, so you can't get the restand. But to be fair, going first is kind of broken in D format anyway, so maybe this is their way of trying to do the same thing they did in V series, where they tried to sort of balance things out a bit. But problem is if other decks are also kind of crazy, then it doesn't really make a difference, like that much of a difference. But I'm not sure if restand is even that much of a thing in high roll turn 3s. I'm not really that sure. I haven't really played enough Overdress in quite a while, so let's move on to the next card. So here we've got Applewitch Cider. At the end of battle that this unit boosted, if you have a Vanguard Minerva in its name, you can return this to your hand. So it's just like the V series version where you just hit and run with it, and you don't neg anything from your hand when you're calling boosters. But you do need a Minerva Vanguard. So clearly this deck is pushing us to ride Minerva, so Minerva's probably the ride line card. And we did see Minerva get revealed after Melissa and Kama, which were obviously the ride line cards themselves. The other skill is when this card's put on Guardian Circle, if you have a grade 3 card regarding its name, if your soul has a grade 3 Regalia, so ideally I'm guessing you're going to put Angelica in it, this unit gets 5k shield until the end of that battle. So she's a 10k shield, and she's also a free boost as well. So this is a very good card, probably one of the best cards. Actually, to be fair, the support cards are all pretty good. I think Minerva's actually the weakest card between them all. But moving on to the next thing. Angelica. So this is the artwork. This is now the 4th ever Angelica. We've had one for every single era with the exact same name, Regalia of Wisdom Angelica. At the end of the battle that this unit attacked, if you have a Vanguard with Minerva in its card name, so she's a support card basically because she has a rear guard thing written there. Soul +1, choose one of your Vanguards, it gains 5k until end of turn, which means you can stack that 5k for an additional attack as well. So very efficient. You make your Minerva swing for big numbers twice, and Minerva already gains 5k from her own ability, so you're basically swinging 23k minimum. Witcher Frog's Melissa can make it so you can do at least 31k per swing, so that's pretty good actually. And since we are kind to chase and not doing this whole break ride thing, because I think they're trying to push Persona Ride here, they've kind of just gone the direction of basically make it so that if you go turn 4, you're Persona Riding. So they're not doing this whole like Thegria thing where you just pretend both cards have the same name and then do the Persona Ride. Instead, they're just like, nah, Angelica's a rare guard, just put her into Soul or something if you have her in hand, and then maybe, just synergize, get power up, whatever. Then the next skill, then you can put this into your Soul and counter charge 1. So that's a cost, by the way, you put it into Soul. So that's really good because the Witches, they do get Superior called out. So you're not actually calling over units and you're not negging in the process. So the engine's actually pretty good actually for Genesis in this set. I would say the engine is far better than the actual main boss. It's really just that good. And I'm definitely going to build this because I already did pick up a case for when the set comes out. But it's kind of overpriced, so I'm going to look into probably the other case prices and see if it's worth me getting it elsewhere. But yeah, this is kind of like VAR, Ablation Regalia VAR, but in the D format. I don't think this deck will see play. Any of these cards, it's probably not that likely to see play in Premium because you really do want your Regalia names if you want to use the Stride. But to be fair, if all that core stuff didn't exist, then these would not be a bad thing to consider. It just feels like Regalia has so many choices. But obviously it's the generic Genesis that really needs more of a push, and obviously they're not really doing that, so that's kind of a shame. There's no order cards or anything, but I know this morning they did reveal a new order card. So let me just see if I can pull that up somewhere. It doesn't require Regalia though, but it has artwork of Angelica. No, it doesn't look like they've even posted it. But there definitely was a reveal. But basically, off the top of my head, it's basically an order you can use in any Cat Sanctuary deck. It has a picture of Angelica on it. You basically can blast 1, you draw 2, and something about calling 2 cards. I think that's what it was. Let me just, give me a moment. I'll see if I can find it. Alright, thanks Freedom Duo. Seems like they've posted it up. So let's take a look over here. So this is the order card. You can use this in any deck basically. That's Cat Sanctuary. So let's just see if there's a translation image somewhere. But they didn't go for Minerva, which honestly does not surprise me because I was kind of thinking like, oh, there's a Lucia order, there's a Maelstrom order, but there's no way they're going to get Tony Taka to draw twice in one set. No way. There's supposed to be like a sort of 3-year charge before we see another Tony illustration. So here we go anyway. The order card's ability is Wisdom that created the world. Grade 2 order, so you're going to play it from turn 2 onwards. You draw 2, choose 2 cards from your hand. If the grades are equal or lower, then your Vanguard, call them onto rear guard or discard them. So if you wanted to, you could just not call anything. But it's basically CB1 Scry 2, which is good. Yeah, no, this is a really strong ability. Yeah, very, very strong order card. So that's definitely something to, I'm not really a fan of them making cards like that, but it is an order, so at least it makes your deck a bit clunky. Well, it's a grade 2 order, so basically if you're playing some premium, you are hurting your early game riding somewhat, so that's not as bad. And to be fair, CB is kind of valuable anyway. When this unit enters a rear guard, so this is a different card for Cat Sanctuary. When this unit enters a rear guard and your Vanguard have only 1 clan, so boss 1 discard 1 card, choose and add a card with the same clan as your Vanguard to your hand. Same clan. So this is designed basically for Minerva, but it could be used in Magic Lord Blaster as well. And Phantom Blaster Dragon. So that's a very interesting ability. It also has a Soul Blast 1 cost. So it's a bit like Gleipnir and Vine, but they made it into a Greed Shade. Instead of adding cards from your soul to hand, you're adding cards from your drop to hand. But Vine was basically just discard 1. It wasn't actually a Soul Blast cost, but to be fair, the Soul Blast cost could be handy sometimes because you can enable cards like Melissa. But I think that's more or less it for, I guess, some of my thoughts on the new cards. I guess I will see you guys later then, and goodbye.